Mayday, mayday, Erik. 72, we have a smoke in the cabin.
Channel 72, the contact, pilot maintain.
Hello, and welcome to Galactic Terrors for September 2022. I am James Chambers.
Hi, I'm Carol Gyzander.
And we are here with the online reading series that scours the known universe for scary stories, strange tales, weird horror, dark humor, and all sorts of literary oddities from the most imaginative authors writing in a variety of fascinating genres. I think I need some more adjectives in that intro. What do you think?
Yes, yes. That's a good writing tip, right? Be sure to use at least 2 adjectives for everything. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. Or or 3 adverbs. It's 2 adjectives or 3 adverbs, right? I think that's the going advice. But thank you all for tuning in for Galactic Terrors this evening. We have a fantastic program for you tonight featuring Erik T. Johnson, Jonathan Lees, and Wendy N. Wagner, who will be sharing their stories with you tonight and taking questions, your deep probing and insightful questions. So be prepared.
I love the people chatting in the chat and the variety of places and the questions they come up with, so that's one of the fun things that I enjoy about our show.
Me too. Yeah, I think the conversation pieces of this are part of one of the most fun parts, aside from pulling all the levers and twisting all the dials behind the scenes in StreamYard, of course.
Jim is the man behind the curtain. Seriously, he is.
So, but I see, Carol, you have in our notes for tonight that it's 53 days until Halloween.
Mm-hmm. That's the most important fact. We can all go home now that we've announced that. So
just around the corner. I actually broke down this year and was allowed my kids to talk me into buying one of those like automatic jumping spider decorations from Spirit Halloween.
How big is it?
It's not huge, but it's pretty big. It's I haven't assembled it yet, but it's about the size of a garbage can lid, and
ooh,
activate the sensor, it jumps at you.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
cool.
And growls or something because spiders growl all the time,
just like the sharks do during Shark Week. Yes,
right.
Cool. Well, it's September, I think. I just got back from Worldcon and I drove from New York to Chicago, which is only 800 miles each way. So I'm a little confused about what day and time it is. But the other really exciting thing that we should mention is it's Linda Addison's birthday. Thank you for bringing that up in the chat, Jonathan. And she does not get older. Linda Addison, when she reaches the new year, she simply levels up.
Yeah. Agreed completely. Yes. Happy birthday, Linda. We've always enjoyed having you on Galactic Terrors and seeing you in the audience. If you're listening tonight, which really you should be doing something more fun than Galactic Terrors on your birthday. But
wait, what's more fun?
Yeah. Good point. Good point. So why are you not? Your whole birthday entourage should be here watching Galactic Terrors. But happy birthday, Linda, and enjoy.
Cool. Well, we have something exciting that we started doing as well. Many people know and some people don't know that we have a newsletter that gives you information about what the readers are for who the readers are for each month and what's coming up. And we don't spam anybody with this. It's just a list of, who's coming in the links where it's easy, make it easier to find it. But we have a couple of fun giveaways as well. We have 3 ebooks that we can give to anybody who has signed up for our newsletter by the end of the show. So I'm excited to do that. Go ahead and sign up for it if you're interested in getting more information about what's coming up. We send one in advance and we send one the day of it of the show with the links, just to let you know. And we will send out. I will do a random draw tonight and send out one more newsletter in the morning to let everybody know who the winners were. So that's very fun.
What are the 3 books that we are giving away this month?
Jonathan Lees is reading from Even in the Grave. That's a really cool ghost anthology that I've heard some interesting people edited. Who was that? It was James Chambers and Carol Gyzander. Yes. So we're giving away an ebook of that. Erik is reading from Yes, Trespassing, and he has a PDF of that to give away. And also, I have a new charity anthology out that's benefiting reproductive health services and edited by myself and Rachel Brune, and it's called A Woman Unbecoming. This is a gorgeous cover by Lynn Hansen that we're giving out with a bunch of really cool award-winning people and upcoming people. Stories around the theme of righteous rage, anger, and vengeance, and I'm happy to share a copy with that. And we can put a link in later for those who are interested in acquiring a copy. So thank you, everybody who is already on the newsletter, and feel free to tell your friends and sign up if you're not on there already.
And before we get into our readings, we should acknowledge a bit of sad news this week, especially for those of us who love horror fiction and dark fiction in general. Peter Straub, one of the masters of dark fiction, passed away at the age of 79. Peter's the author of books such as Ghost Story, Coco, The Throat, Julia, Shadowland, and there's others. Let's see. I'm trying to think of the one. Well, he co-wrote The Talisman with Stephen King. And the sequel, Black House, again with Stephen King, and has written many excellent short stories and novellas. And Peter is known for sort of writing the modern Gothic story and novels. Some of his other books, Mr. X is another one. I should have written down a list of all of them. There's so many to remember. But we just want to acknowledge Peter's contributions to the genre. He was a Lifetime Achievement Award recipient from the Horror Writers Association in 2005. And he also had a reputation for being one of the most supportive authors you could find, especially to new authors, young authors. He was always happy to take some time at a convention. I think I saw on social media after the news of his death broke, many people recounting times that they saw him at a convention, met him at a convention, and he took an hour or more to just talk to them about writing and encourage them and give them insight. I only got to chat with him a handful of times. I think the last time, and I'm just going to share quickly a picture. This was back in Brooklyn in, I think, 2016. Another writer I know, John Tibbetts, wrote a book about Peter's work, and he did a live interview at the bookstore with Peter, talking through the themes of his works and his writing career. And afterward, Peter was very kind to sit around and chat with everybody who was there, sign books, and just kind of hang out. So it's a big loss for the horror community. And if you haven't read Peter Straub's work yet, I definitely encourage you to do so.
Yes, indeed. Well, thank you for sharing that. That's very poignant. And I've seen the same type of comments of so many people who were, affected and felt very supported by him.
And thank you, John Collins, in the chat. This is the title I was struggling for. Whoops. There we go. Lost Boy, Lost Girl. Yes, excellent book. That was a really amazing novel. All right, so I think we're going to jump into our readings in just a moment. Before we do, please like and subscribe if you're enjoying the Galactic Terrors broadcast. I put the newsletter link in the chat, so you can also check that out if you'd like to. Liking helps us with YouTube. Subscribing will keep you posted when we update the YouTube channel about the next session. So every time we post an upcoming session, I think you get a notification, because none of us have enough notifications in our lives these days. Enough things pinging and buzzing at us, but this Galactic Terrors is worth it. So we hope you'll check it out.
Yeah, terrific.
Yeah. All right.
And that's clearly for those watching on YouTube, and those who are watching on Facebook Live. We're happy to have you here with us as well. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Please like also on Facebook Live. I'm not exactly sure how that one works, but if you've subscribed or if you've liked or followed our HWA NY chapter Facebook page or our Galactic Terrors Facebook group. You should automatically get notifications there as well when we have a broadcast coming up. And if you really don't want to miss the next Galactic Terrors, just follow all 3 of those channels. Like, subscribe, follow, pin, whatever you can do.
Excellent.
All right. So shall we move on to our
yes,
first
I
reader?
can't wait. Oh, I'm looking forward to some interesting and fabulous words.
All right. First up tonight is Erik T. Johnson. Erik's works have appeared in over 60 markets, including the #1 Amazon bestseller, I Can Taste the Blood, alongside Josh Mallerman, best-selling author of Bird Box, and John F.D. Taft, Bram Stoker-nominated best-selling author of The End and All Beginnings. His work has also appeared in Dead But Dreaming 2 and all 5 of Michael Bailey's award-winning Chiral Mad anthologies, among other books. His short stories have also been featured in a range of literary speculative fiction periodicals such as Space and Time magazine, British fantasy journal Electric Velocipede, and Sein und Werden. His short fiction collection, Yes, Trespassing, was released in 2017 to many positive reviews from professional publications and readers alike. He is especially grateful that This Is Horror UK stated that Yes, Trespassing is a magnum opus of staggering proportions, one of the best, most beautifully written collections of this or any other year. You can find out more about Erik at his website, www.eriktjohnson.net. Let's welcome Erik.
Before I begin, I just want to say, if you hear any static from my computer, just pretend we're back in the analog days and this is a radio broadcast. This story is called The Waiting Room. Another early morning, Dr. Yelena walks through a gratuitous drizzle of rain that dries immediately she enters the clinic. The empty factories, crumbling burbs, the landfill acreage off-gassing the gloomy stink of high crime/poverty ratings, neglected avenues of foreclosed houses appear briefly behind her shoulder as she opens the door upon the room. The forecast calls for a sunny day with no chance of precipitation. But the second she shuts the front door, a storm jumps down as though correlation were causation. The doctor is bad news arrived in the flesh. The clinic exceeds the drabbest lack of expectations. It's a chill November, yet the heating has been broken for God knows how long, and he's not concerned. The walls are a distasteful shade of stale black coffee. A punitive claustrophobia is general. 2, 3 dead plants in clusters of shedding dry brown flakes hang before narrow windows, accidentally painted over along with the walls. No denying the waiting room is absurdly sized, some hedgehog's burrow, and the doctor barely passes her own test of willpower, straining to avoid the begging eyes of the patients as she continues walking across the room. The patients, from clueless children to the demented aged, approaching penultimate days, are crammed in wheezing, coughing knots on benches full of the broken of heart, spleen, lung, head, and throw in the rest while we're at it. A snot-caked, aching, rashy, rheumy-eyed bunch, each reeking of death, no matter what the distance might be from this one moment to each of their unique funerals. The scent, kind of like evaporated traces of mucus and bile, but ultimately it's inaccurately describable. It smells like the clinic's waiting room. The patients seem almost hanging onto the benches as if about to slip to the unevenly planked floor, sitting at miserably intimate, seasick angles on chintzy, collapsed, verged furniture. The legs bent, creaked into untrustworthy polio angles. Doctor, A stunted, throat-bloated man scratches the air. I've been here, but the doctor has finished crossing the room and shuts the interior door. Her goal all along. It is a gesture of inexorable finality. Like the patients, Dr. Yelena has also been at the clinic, a very long, unhappy time. And after shutting the door on the grumbling sick, she enters the doctor's waiting room, unaware of the frown that's become a permanent escutcheon of her misery since she's worked at the clinic. It is packed and identical as the patient's waiting room, with two exceptions. The benches are sturdy wood, thoughtfully cushioned. If a bit worn, they've grown over the who cares how many years of use. And the waiting many are not ill. They are all the doctors who work at the clinic. Yelena barely manages to just fill a space between two colleagues. She doesn't bother to see who they are, though each knows their coworkers well. Without looking, she knows the neighbors flanking her on the bench have heavy-lidded eyes that are sour, their expressions rusted barbed wire that would crumble to an intruder's naked touch. Even as she settles into uncomfortable place, her fellow doctors continue to do their waiting in silence. They've long ago become accustomed to having their private spaces screech mute to a jerking halt without a moment's notice. The sweat or BO flesh of a colleague against another approaching intolerable, time-stressed, all rush hour serious delays, New York subway commuter style. So much weight in that quiet, and each unmoving. Statues hid within marble slabs, awaiting a sculptor's vision, hammer and chisel to make them real. Traditionally, the last to arrive mornings in the doctor's waiting room initiates the small talk. Today, that's Yelena. The cold, the prospect of the job ahead having driven her to a sluggish pace that broke her personal record to that point. I'm late, she says, and it's hard to speak. Got to strain against apathetic air, a medium like diluted formaldehyde. Not too late, though, a muttering colleague wrote. Everything is rote at the clinic. On cue, the fat, queasy-faced doctor, always about to, but never bringing forth vomit, blurts that all this rain has certainly taken them by great surprise. Wouldn't you know, one can't trust the newspapers these days. And he adds something else, a question, judging by the inflection with which he ceases the astringent mud of his voice, but nobody pays any attention. Yes, from a bored other. What the answer is into, who knows? Does it matter? What do you think? Of course not. They'll get soaked then, Yelena says, when they leave. I didn't see any umbrellas in their waiting room or in here. Me either, more sigh than assent. No, the chief doctor says, through an untamed mustache with an air of brutalized tumbleweeds about them. But at least we can wait here until the storm's passed, as I'm sure it will. Whereas they'll just have to go home when the clinic closes. Likely, it'll still be pouring, but storms eventually pass. Just as we doctors will eventually be done working overtime. How much more waiting do we have today? Yelena recites her line. Don't clock watch, the chief doctor again. Slightest trace of scolding authority in his pale eyes. You've got to factor in our full day, which had just begun not half an hour before Dr. Yelena arrived. Then there's the rain, which can be quite unpredictable. My professional guess is 10 or 11 hours. It's simply a case of waiting and nothing to do but wait it out. His thin lips shut tight, almost imperceptibly tight. A dropped guillotine blade. That's the routine. Silence descends once more. It's a suicide, a jumper off the highest tower. Don't expect to hear him speak anytime soon. The dense crowd of patients who arrived long before the clinic opened spend the day waiting the allotted 8 hours until closing time. A tinny electronic bell on a timer announces its arrival. Outside, the rain has intensified. It's angry. It's too early for sundown, but the sky's an overflowing gutter of watery black effluvia. None of the patients had seen any doctors, nor exchanged a single word between themselves and clinic staff. Those patients, how terrible. Can it be life is made this way? If you think about it too much, you'll go mad, so stop. Those patients, they'd huddled through the cold, cruel hours, and each 5, 10, 30, 60 minutes brought more sorrow, frustration, more rage, hate, fear, pain, and despair. But then, no one is ever attended to at the clinic. That's not how it works. Or rather, that's the way it does. Look at the patients all drenched as they drag themselves away from hopes at least a few shades more vivid than wishes, which would be enough for them at this point. The doctors bond in professional silence. You can easily imagine they're sharing a meaningful vow, like Quakers coming together as they continue waiting in the doctor's waiting room. This goes on for several hours after closing time. As ever, by now, Dr. Elena forgets her identity, feels part of a gelatinous mass too heavy to ooze. As she'd arrived, so shall we leave, last. Extricated from her colleagues, she'll think about how she's going to quit. She won't come in tomorrow. What nonsense. Where else do I have to go? And what are the job prospects these days? She can only think for so long. Sleep beckons like the world's greatest lover. They'll never speak about it, but the other doctors are having the same thoughts. Every morning the clinic opens. Every night it closes. The doctors wait in their waiting room over such an extended duration for good reason. To avoid being accosted by angry or frightened or tearful patients who could be lurking outside, who knows, they might do the same thing if they were sick like them, crammed on the other side of the door in that terrible brown room. But the doctors just want to make their ways home in peace. They've had such a long day at work. The doctors are worn out. They want to feel well, just like anyone else. They know any patients lingering late would get all up in their faces, demand to know why they'd had to wait all day in that horrible room, and how come not a single doctor examined spoke to even just one of them. Not even one, they'd spit and hiss. They were all sick, for Christ's sakes, the lurking patients would shout. Weren't the doctors supposed to heal them? But none of the doctors are up to explaining that there's no cure for those ill folks' conditions. The doctors, they're far too tired to speak after all those many hours in their own waiting room. And now I have a very short, very old little story called The Rock at the End of the World. John was starving but wouldn't eat the apple. He leaned, folded up like a dollar bill behind the dumpster, looking at the shiny red surface reflecting blinking neon light, listening to cannibals eating each other up the block. He was going to wait until he could stand it no longer before biting into what could be his last meal. As the screams died down, a girl appeared at the mouth of the alley. It was Katerina. He had once done her a good turn by walking her home late one night when the end of the world had only just started and people thought it was temporary. She was just rosier than a bone and smiling like a kid caught in the middle of something fun and forbidden. It's dangerous out here, Katerina, John said. Why aren't you home? I have to show you something, she said. Not now, but Katerina skipped closer. Come on, I have to show you something. John was too exhausted to answer. He shut his eyes to gather the energy for a response, and Katerina pulled the apple from his hand. She ran to the mouth of the alley, laughing mischievously. "Give it back," John said, fear and anger churning his blood in fast, irregular waves. "Come on," she said, and ran away. John stumbled to his feet. He chased after the girl down an empty block, darting between smoking cars on the pavement. He knew she was heading home, and he had no choice but to follow, to get that apple. He refused to turn cannibal like the rest of the population. Why had his former friend decided this moment to torment him like this? It was only a few blocks away to her place, but it felt like miles. John was surprised he was able to stay upright, let alone run. But hunger gave a strange strength, and he eventually caught sight of the girl again. She was racing down an alley toward the high gates of her home that had no doubt kept her safe and alive through these fatal times. She moved too quickly, and John couldn't keep up. Pain pierced his side. Katerina opened the gate. He felt his blood settle like backed up sewage, legs go weak, the street buckle under his bare, bloody feet. John tripped on a rock. Now he'd never catch her. So he picked that rock up and threw it as Katerina was slipping through the gate. It hit the back of her head, and she fell on her face, half in the street and half on her property. The apple flew from her hand toward the house. John limped over to the body. It lay still. But he'd had no choice but to kill Katerina to save his own life. He swung open the gate and saw a huge apple tree, heavy with plenty of fruit ripe for picking and sharing. That is the end of my show.
Wow, Erik, very, very intense stuff. Cool. I think anybody who's ever been at a clinic waiting room will understand that feeling.
Yeah, it's a Kafkaesque experience, which sort of is what turned into that story.
I was going to ask what your inspiration was for it. So yeah.
I guess, yeah.
Cool. Amy asked a question in the chat. Do you have an aversion to waiting rooms?
I mean, Amy, do you like them?
I think that's fair. That's fair, yeah. And, of course, these folks are probably going to come back every day until they can't anymore. So,
well, exactly. And it's just been this way. I mean, the pandemic has been like one giant horrific waiting room, I think, in a way, with doctors sitting on the other side doing nothing for you in many cases, or you're unable to get to them. So I think there's an aspect of that too.
Yeah, it's something we've all shared and gone through.
Yeah.
It's true. Yeah. I was intrigued with this second one, the shorter piece, with the apple, because I was thinking sort of Little Red Riding Hood going out into the woods, and he's, all sorts of adventure, but then the apple with Cinderella, and, there's a lot of interesting imagery in there.
Yeah, that's interesting. I never thought of that at all. But it's cool the way people can interpret things, differently.
Yeah. We can all read the same thing and come away with something different.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it is a primordial symbol, the apple, I guess, because of the Bible. So.
Yeah. That's probably true. And I'm intrigued with this collection of yours. So this is from Yes Trespassing, both of these, or?
One of them is. The other is more recent.
Okay.
The earlier piece is more recent. I mean, the one I read first is more recent.
Okay. So, I gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah.
So from what I understand of your work, you write a lot of different things and you do a lot of different creative stuff, right? Poetry as well as short stories. And
yeah, I've been kind of all over the place. So when I do fiction, it tends to be horrific or a little disturbing in one way or another. And then when I do poetry, it tends to be more straightforward, or, I don't know how to explain it, like more direct, emotional stuff. And I work with these classical composers, jazz composers in New York City, and we do performances together. They'll write stuff around my words, and I'll perform with them and do sort of spoken word to the music. So I've been up to that also. So it's kind of nice having my fingers in these different creative pies, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I've heard about that, the performances. It sounds really cool.
Yeah, it's totally cool. It's fun.
When you're putting something together that they're going to do music to, are you thinking about the potential music, or are you just doing a piece and offering it for their
Typically, they ask me for something like either just about it on a theme, or it will be, do you have any poems? And, we like this one, and, we'll do it around that. But this composer once asked me, do you have any poems about Estonia? And I was like, yeah, let me go look that up in the E file of my poetry collection files. And of course not, but like I adapted some Estonian folktale into
that's cool.
a different telling. So yeah, that kind of thing happens a lot.
Oh, that makes a really cool inspiration. That's really neat.
Yeah, it's cool.
So the other thing that I think is, from what I understand, the Yes collection has a lot of interesting embellishments to the text in the print version. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh yeah, so Michael Bailey, the editor, and I, when we were putting it together, we were sort of like, I do a lot of doodles when I'm writing. I draw little diagrams. I do weird little things with my pen when I'm writing beyond the words. And we were thinking, let's just sort of, but I'm very careful about the words, and I put a lot of work into polishing them, and we were like, let's put a little bit of the, show the mess that goes on behind that in the book. Mm-hmm. So there'll be pages with just notes and ideas and like, oh, this is a cool line, and this is an idea for a story, and, should I do this with the plot, and drawings and doodles, and those will be stuck between it,
Yeah.
Which turned out to be fun.
Jonathan Lees points out Erik's notebooks are iconic. So that's very cool. That's very cool. Yeah.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing your words. We'll look forward to having you come back and chat with us all at the end. Thank you so much, Erik.
Yeah, thank you.
Very cool.
Looking forward to talking more.
Yeah. Cool. I'm going to put my glasses on now because it's that time of day and night. I'd like to introduce our next reader. My friend Jonathan Lees originally hails from a shuttered mill town in New England and can now often be spotted lurking in the alleys of New York, or deep within the barrens of New Jersey. This year, he unleashes 3 stories. Power Out, Wind Howling, from the spirited anthology Even in the Grave, edited by James Chambers and Carol Gyzander. In addition to They Are Still Out There, You Just Can't See Them Anymore, and Doug Morano's The Hideous Book of Hidden Horrors, and It Comes in Waves, in Other Terrors, an inclusive anthology by Rena Mason and Vince Laguno. You can find him on Instagram and Twitter at Jonathan Lees.
Hi, everyone. Shouts to Carol and Jim for having me, and also for adding me to their book, Even in the Grave. Tonight, I'm reading from this, and the story is called Power Out, Wind Howling. As I claw at the wind, the bruised sky spits in my face, and my boots stumble on the rotting earth surrounding the grounds of the dormant Mathis estate. The soil, as if remembering the contours of my soul, sucks at my boots with each step. The frowning face of the manor peers from behind whipping branches, the architectural embodiment of the morose teenager I used to be, harshly reminding me why I refused to return after my 18th year. Everything here looks depressed, as if it can recall what happened within its walls, as if it all gave up and died without a fight. The storm and the trees wail and wave at me not to continue, but I ignore their cries and trudge towards the sore mouth of the house, regretting every step. The floorboards that used to screech at just the slightest bit of pressure from our pajama-padded feet now shout upon my entrance. The foundation quakes as the storm yanks the door shut tight behind me, rattling the paintings in the hall. I wait to be expelled, and sent tumbling back down the hill. Everything reeks of dank fabric, the tang of wallpaper paste, and a meaty musk of black mold. My eyes can barely adjust to the gloom before I enter the room, whose memories made up everything I ran away from. My family often looked through the diamond-shaped panes of the lancet windows, and upon the town below, they claimed as their own personal snow globe, handcrafted, everything in its place, and ready to be shaken up whenever they felt like it. Mathis Hospital, Mathis Middle School, Mathis Diner, Mathis Lumber, Mathis Cemetery. We got you covered from birth to death. Father's family started in paper. Mothers thrived in textiles, two common industries for a New Englander in the 40s. Dad's older brother, Joseph Jansen Mathis, after the businesses failed to diversify and took a downturn based on losses to cheap imports, swiped some change from the coffers, and he took off on a world tour. An expedition of freedom, he called it, peppered with frequent postcards of my uncle proudly posing in various hellholes, a flourish mother added as she read the barely legible text on the back. JJ returned 9 months later with a hitch in his speech, a glaze on his eyes, skin sticking to his bones, and not a cent left tossing in his pockets. Our family discovered him one evening, sitting in the living room, lost in the fire, nearly nude and soaking, his skivvies wrinkling around his privates, his skin so pale the fabric looked like ropey blisters about to burst. His neck, chest, hands, legs all had miniature lacerations, puckered and bloodless. Dad said they were no more the size of paper cuts. He wouldn't tell anyone what happened or what was in the 10 crates pressed against the wall of the study. Mother said his head always swam with ideas, but his brain drowned at the bottom of that black ocean he traveled. A lot of pacing and shouting, alone in empty rooms, and within a couple weeks, JJ looked different. His complexion florid, his speech focused. The silt in his eyes disappeared, and the slouch in his walk straightened. He thanked everyone for their care at a crucial time, though, truthfully, I don't remember anyone really doing anything that could be deemed care. He gave them no other explanation and returned to his study, locking himself inside, rarely emerging except to check the front door for packages, of which there were many. 5 years pass. With his repeated jaunts to remote parts of the world no one in my family cared to even pronounce, never mind visit, JJ amassed a small fortune. Through investments and clientele to which no one was privy, his wealth grew to shocking proportions, bringing the family to the height of the New York City skyline by the time I reached adulthood. 10 years later, every last member of my family had been erased, and all I inherited were the empty rooms, the unanswered questions, and the remnants of bad ideas. I lock the door of my childhood home behind me and draw the curtains even as the windows chatter, the glass shaking like steel cages in the hands of anxious inmates. The hinges whimper, begging me to open them and let the storm in to destroy the damn house once and for all. The study looks the same as my uncle left it. Any visitor would find it spacious and refined. JJ's amassment of books, the only objects of profound interest, are bound behind twisted piano wire, peering from gilded frames that canvas the massive walls. The nameless tolls beg for attention, taut spines saturated in vibrant hues of red, brown, and black leathers, gold paint laid in the grooves with no numbers or letters to differentiate them. My hands sweat down the handles of the bolt cutters that I brought with me. I trail a finger along the wire, relishing its bite, then just past it, and my finger jumps instinctively from the heat, a pulsing on the book spines throbbing like the veins on my wrist. It's impossible. The warnings were nested within lullabies from my uncle's raw lips, little whistles of air dancing around the refrains. They are everywhere and nowhere at once. I turn off the lights so I can see their silhouettes approaching the windows, these night people. I've seen his drawings of them, their eyes a shock of white in the darkness right before they're upon you. I listened to his legends of magics and rituals conducted in regions where people's entire lives were spent looking over their shoulders. I've dreamt of their murderous ways, slinking around in the darkest hours, feeding people poisons. I've been told the stories of the night people, and in front of me, bound in these cages, scrawled in these pages, are supposedly the remnants of their legends. I look outside. The old elms hide their approach. I know they are out there. These giant shadows, profane mouths widening, a proclivity for violence lighting their eyes. At first, I'm terrified. Teeth jittering, limbs alight with tremors. Me, Anderson Mathis III, the descendant of possible demons, an inheritor of their torment, shivering behind the moldering curtains, listening to them shout our name once again. It's a sound unlike any other. It was almost music that sang from the dense Manhattan streets below our Mathis Tower. A whirling, reverberating sonic assault with lyrics composed of muffled shouts. The heightening winds howled along with the chants of the growing crowd, defeating the reasons why the family chose these top floors. As far above the filth as they could be, my mother spit. Away from these rats shoving and climbing over each other to get to the equivalent of nowhere, the father proclaimed. Anderson stirred his fourth gin and tonic while he slumped in a mirrored chair that faced the skyline. He thought of the Mathis house tucked deep in the quaint New England hamlet he was raised in. He could picture the vacant rooms all holding their breath, waiting for someone's return. The books, hundreds of them behind razor wire, still, sweating, waiting to be touched. Within the play of light and shadow from the increasingly tumultuous weather outside of this luxury prison, his eyes darted around the space, waiting for some of the darkness to take shape. The night people floating out of blind corners until their phantom limbs wrapped around his own and pulled him in, and the lights went out. Anderson Mathis III, ex-star quarterback, ex-media personality, ex-socialite, jumped from the chair and squealed. He fumbled with the flashlight, and the beam glanced over the painted war masks from Africa, the crouching taxidermy tigers, the furniture rot from bones. His chest heaved in with each wave of his hand, hoping his heart wouldn't give out when the solid light got interrupted by a figure standing on the other side of the cavernous suite. Since Anderson was a child, he had been taught that within absolute darkness is the waiting room for the lost. He knew one day the night people would be done waiting and they would step into the light. Sorry for the tense change. I got so into it, I actually included myself in there.
That's okay. Thank you so much, Jonathan. That was wonderful.
Yeah, thank you.
Really
That was
great.
my first time reading it out loud.
It sounds terrific. As Sue commented, you have a great reading voice.
Oh, that's good, because I think I sound like trash every time I play back.
But no, that's fantastic. And I love that story. Obviously, I think it's a really excellent piece of writing since it wound up even in the grave. And
Appreciate it.
I guess I'm wondering, so you're having like a kind of a breakout year in a way. You've got stories coming out in 3 great anthologies. You've been writing for quite a while, and I'm thinking back to some of the early stories of yours that I read back even when we had like a little crit group going on in the HWA NY chapter. And
burn them all.
What's that?
Burn them all.
But one of the things I remember from discussions about stories with you was that one of the things that was most important to you was your style, was finding your style to write. And because there were things where you would get feedback where we'd say, well, you could say this a little simpler, or I didn't quite get this. And, and it was very important to you to not compromise style in that sense. So I'm just wondering, how do you feel your style has evolved. I think. Do you feel like you're getting it finally tuned now that everything is sort of coming together the way you hope with the story?
Well, I think the important thing is I've aligned myself with people who I trust to give me feedback, and you being one of them. And I just think that in my day job, I thrive off instantaneous decisions and changes to everything that we do in business and creative structure. So I think that I've never taken it upon myself to, think like this can't be changed. No, everything can be changed. In fact, as I was practice reading this story, I was like, damn it, I wish I flipped this. I wish I put this over here. I'm like in a constant state of editing. And I appreciate that. And I think that's one thing that can never be overstated is how important the editing process is and how extreme I am when I labor over something. Even this story, I should flip the Q&A back to you. Say, like when you first read this, you definitely had feedback. I mean, it was a hot mess. And, I love tweaking things. It's definitely a favorite part of the process for me.
Yeah, and I would absolutely not describe what you sent in as a hot mess. But I think we put it through an editorial process, and I think one of the reasons that I enjoyed working with you on that story is because having read a lot of your work over the years, I felt like I had a sense for what I could suggest as an editor that wouldn't compromise your style and your voice. So I hope you found that was the case, but you don't have to answer that question. It's probably better if you don't.
No, there was no compromise there.
Awesome. But that kind of is a good segue into a question from Brian Matthews. So you've had great success recently with your publishing. Where would you like to see your writing career in 5 years? Any specific goals?
Yeah, good question, Brian. I mean, I set goals for myself every day, again, in work and in creative life, and try to find the pockets of time that I can actually work on something that benefits me in the long run. Majority is that I just want people to read stories that I write and connect with them somehow, even if they don't connect with them. Just the fact that they've read them gives me excitement. So I do love the short form. I want to continue writing short stories that are impactful for me, but I have a lot of long form pieces that I've written and thrown in the trash over the years. I just started publishing, and I'm in my 40s. So I feel like this is a good time to force myself to get that longer workout and put it in trusted hands and say, please eviscerate this if need be, and find a way to get that piece out. I do think the novella is the perfect length for me. I love novellas. I have a cinematic brain, trained on cinema, so I feel like the novella has always been that perfect movie length too. It's a story, so yeah, that's what I'm looking forward to. Thanks, Brian.
Excellent. Yeah, and that's a great lead in for another question. This one from Carol. Does your extensive knowledge of movies inform your own writing? So it sounds like it does.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can't overstate that enough. I mean, in addition to growing up watching films like Jaws or The Goonies, or like getting deeper into Italian giallo and then experimental film, and when I hit New York, I think all of it has sort of painted the way I deal with words, and sometimes that's probably what can infuriate people. I do crash end on images, do hard cuts, do fine dissolves. I do think like that. It's definitely something I always go back to.
Yeah, it certainly flavors your storytelling, that sort of cinematic approach.
Sorry, my glasses are fogging up. I can't see shit. Sorry.
Oh, it's okay. It's super humid. For those not on the East Coast, the humidity is like immeasurably high these last few days. So, but we have one more question. This one from Nicholas Dyack. And for those who aren't familiar with Final Frame, it's the film competition of StokerCon, which Jonathan has been overseeing, coordinating, running, programming, doing miracles with since the beginning of StokerCon. And Nick is interested about what your biggest accomplishment or highlight from doing Final Frame is.
Well, the fact that I can continue to do it is a great accomplishment. But I think there's a level of skepticism from filmmakers and maybe even the judges that we bring in for this competition about what to expect, what the night's gonna hold. And it's the outpouring of support for the filmmakers that I'm obsessed with. I love supporting filmmakers, especially those either at the beginning or even mid-career that have just decided the short film is a different way to express themselves. And then judges, some very famous, some just cool characters in the horror genre. They come through, they watch with the crowd, and almost always they come up to me and say, well, that was fucking fantastic. That was, that was just, it flowed right. The choices were diverse, and that's all I want. It's like, it's hard to entertain a room of 200 plus people. I've tried to do it my whole life. And, like if I can find the right films that make sense together and that have a little bit of a roller coaster action going through the evening, then that's all I want.
That's great. Yeah, especially 200 jaded horror fans who have seen it all when it comes to horror movies. Right.
Oh, I can't even talk about my face when I see some of the films that don't make it in.
Well, Jonathan, thank you so much. Congratulations on the stories you have coming out. And you can tell us a bit more about those at the end of the session. We're going to
save the best
say temporarily farewell and move on to our next reader. Thank you, Jonathan.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Up next is Wendy N. Wagner. Wendy is the editor-in-chief of Nightmare Magazine and the managing/senior editor of Lightspeed. Her short stories, essays, and poems run the gamut from horror to environmental literature. Her longer work includes the novella The Secret Skin, one of the Washington Post's best SFFH books of 2021, the horror novel The Deer Kings, the Locus bestselling SF eco-thriller An Oath of Dogs, and 2 novels for the Pathfinder role-playing game. She lives in Oregon with her very understanding family, 2 large cats, and a Muppet disguised as a dog. You can find her at winnywoohoo.com. Welcome, Wendy.
To be here. I'm going to read a little bit from my Gothic novella, The Secret Skin. It's the story of a woman in the 1920s who very reluctantly returns to her family's estate to watch over her 9-year-old niece while her brother takes a second honeymoon. And when she gets home, she's forced to remember what was terrible about the family home and why it's gotten even worse. I thought I would just start on the first page and we'll see how far we get. Last night I dreamed of storm break, dear Lillian, for the first time since we escaped that salt place. Neither you nor Abigail stood beside me. I was alone, an invisible witness, a pair of eyes suspended in the mist. Down the front driveway I came, sweeping over the moon-white length of crushed oyster shells, and in my dream, the house was not the place I said goodbye to that night, with the roses clawing at our legs, but instead the house of my childhood, all lit up for one of Mamma's party. Servants moved past me in the sweet spring night, their coattails swinging as they hurried to meet the guests in their motor cars. The dream figures were sometimes Frederick and sometimes Beeman, and sometimes they were somehow both. The sounds, though, were perfect. You don't realize how much the sounds make a time or a place. Storm Break in its heyday had its own pattern of sounds. Always, somewhere, there was an engine. The snarl of someone's Mercedes or the smooth growl of one of my father's boats. Day or night, there was always some reason to run a motor, much to Daddy's joy. On the far side of the grounds, the horses made their own funny music, a counterpoint to the constant tinkling laughter of the guests. And always the sea. You remember that, Lil. Sometimes I wake in the night missing the sound of it, and only you can sing me back to sleep. If there was one reason to go back to Storm Break, it would be to stand on the great cliff and watch and listen to the endless murmuring motion of the waves. But I cannot. That house, as we knew it, is gone. I was born in Storm Break, and I very nearly died in it. On the worst nights, the nights when the trains make an endless screeching, or Abigail wakes in one of her fits, or I've been drinking too much bootleg whiskey, on those nights, I think perhaps I should have died there. But some nights, most nights, Lillian, I lie in your arms and I try not to think about Storm Break except to be glad that I have seen the last of it. It was built, and it lived, and it died, that house. It awakened to the kind of life that only living things can know, for it was a great house, the first of its kind in its wild place. And like all great houses, it breathed in secrets and whispered them in the dark. The ones I know, I'm writing this letter to explain to you. The ones I don't? Well, I suppose that they, like Storm Break, remain the province of the wind and the waves and the things that watch beneath the ragged petals of the roses. Chapter 1. A passenger train ran from Portland to Coos Bay, but given my family, it was cheaper to catch one of our steamers headed south. The ships didn't usually put in on the route from Grays Harbor to San Francisco, but for my brother, they made an exception. That's how it was when you were a Vogel. There were bigger shipbuilders and richer lumber companies, but my family did well enough. That was only a year ago, but it feels much longer sitting here in our little set of rooms. Mrs. Hendricks, the headmistress at the Ladies' Academy, rode with me to the riverboat that would take me from Portland to the coast. We didn't talk much, but that suited me. We'd never been close, my employer and I, but we both knew I had no desire to return to my family's estate. At the docks, she gave me a new pair of gloves. Joseph, our driver and handyman, gave me a stiff, whiskery hug that nearly knocked off my cloche hat. I couldn't remember the last time someone had hugged me. Not even my pupils were much inclined. If anyone in my family had ever hugged me, I suppose it was Frederick. Of all my siblings, he spent the most time at the family's Oregon habitation. We were the oldest in age, although he had a good 10 years on me, and we both had my mother's skin. It made him shy as a boy, all his scales showing beneath his short pants, but once they were hidden away, he became as friendly and delightful as a golden retriever. People said he took after my mother that way. She was known from Seattle to Sacramento for her gracious ways and wonderful parties. Being gracious is not the same as being friendly, or kind, or loving, but it counts a very great deal inside the Portland, San Francisco, Southern Oregon social circles that my mother ran in. That my mother dominated. Despite its location in the most backwater of Oregon's backwaters, Storm Break had hosted 3 governors, a half-dozen senators, and an entire fleet of local officials during her tenure as hostess, and after her passing, Frederick's wife Blanche had kept the house's good reputation. Things had gone quiet since Blanche died 8 years ago. It wasn't that Frederick didn't enjoy a good party, but his schedule kept him too busy for a social life, or so I presumed from his letters. I reread the latest several times during my journey down the coast. He had filled it with his customary happy dashes of business and charity work, and only just managed to squeeze in the itinerary for his honeymoon. His letters were so chatty I had actually missed the fact he'd gotten engaged. I might have never realized he'd be married if he hadn't begun discussing plans for a lavish honeymoon spent traveling to Mexico. 2 months he'd be gone. 2 months said if I didn't mind horribly, if I could, oh, please, for the sake of family feeling, set aside my summer plans and help out with his little girl, such a good girl, no matter what the last nanny said, such a lonely little girl who couldn't be alone in a house filled with servants, not when she could learn firsthand what family really meant. Looking back, Lil, I am surprised I succumbed to my brother's pleading. But maybe I was looking for some excuse, any excuse, to face my family pile one more time, to see it with fresh eyes, to say goodbye, maybe, to the people who had died under its roof. I supposed that in 2 months' time there'd be someone else making the rules at Stormbreak. A new wife, a new chance for a Vogel heir, a new excuse for a party. Prohibition or not, my brother deserved a big party. He had been through dark times over these last 8 years. So much loss, and a little girl to raise too. I never once thought I needed to see Abigail. If I had spent time with her during that last year at home, I could not remember any interactions in any detail. I did remember her eyes, wide and brown as my own when I was a little thing, and I have a few sketches of her in the sketchbook I managed to bring away with me when I left Stormbreak. But I know I never changed a diaper or fed Abigail, and I don't remember ever holding her. I imagine I wasn't allowed to. Blanche had so many rules about her baby. Some feeling squirmed within me, and I pulled out my sketchbook and pencil. Stormbreak was not far now. Those rocks to the south of us had to mark the tip of Cape Arago. My hand moved over the page, following my eyes as they scrolled across the sky. But as we went around the cliffs beneath Stormbreak, I put my pencil in the sketchbook and shut my eyes. I wasn't ready to see this state yet. Better to prepare myself by the long ride up from the harbor road. Better to let the crushed oyster drive slowly reveal the house that workers had finished on the very day I was born within its walls. We were a strange sort of twins, Stormbreak and I. I half yearned to be under its roof and half yearned to wing like a seabird back up the coast, back to my room in Mrs. Shavington's boarding house with my students, my paintings, my friends. I couldn't imagine spending this summer with a spoiled 9-year-old girl. The wind softened as the ship began its slow slide toward Charleston. The air smelled of ferns and fish guts, and the boats we passed were filled with eyes staring back at me, the faces raw with interest. It was the same expression people had been making at me my entire childhood, and seeing it, I felt as if I hadn't merely traveled 200 miles south, but also back in time. The world looked younger here, the people far removed from the cultural and scientific advances of Oregon's biggest city. I felt younger here. If I opened my mouth, the voice that emerged would be tinged with the proper Victorian tones my mother had devoted herself to cultivating. And I think I'll stop right there before she gets to the house and anything too terrible can happen to her.
That's so much fun. Oh, I love me a Gothic house. So cool.
Always a blast, right?
Right?
Yeah.
I've read so many novels where the woman is standing on the cliff in the nightgown with the mansion in the background, and you brought out that feeling so well.
Oh, that's exactly what I pictured, you know. There is, in fact, a little girl standing on a cliff in the wind with the nightgown. That actually happens in the story, so fun.
Awesome. Oh, I can't read the rest now.
Well, it's very short, so that makes it easy.
Yeah. What was your inspiration for the story?
Well, I had read, Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, and I'd actually just come hard on the heels of a big Gothic fiction binge with Jane Eyre and The Haunting of Hill House, and I thought to myself that it would be great to have a Gothic story that was set in Oregon. But, growing up in Oregon, it is always very Oregon history is just like sawmills and loggers and mud and stuff. And it's like, could you ever have a Gothic novel that's set in the mud and crud? And I tried writing this book a couple of different ways, and I wound up taking it a much more traditional Gothic style with this family that's very wealthy, with the fancy manor house. So it is a bit removed from the regular Oregon lifestyle. But there still is a sawmill, and it does have a lot to do with, lumber barons and things like that.
Okay, cool. I can't help but ask, does the poor girl standing out on the cliff have to stand in the rain because it's Oregon? Yeah.
One thing that people do not know about Oregon is that it doesn't rain here in the summertime, like hardly at all. And New York gets the same or more rain, as does Atlanta, as we do here in Portland, because it just doesn't rain in the summer. So they're mostly dry in this book because it's the summertime.
That's very interesting. Yeah, I had no idea that was the way the climate went.
Cool.
So I think you touched on this a little bit, but Teal James Glenn asked, what drew you to the Gothic form? So you've mentioned some of your influences, but maybe there was something that drew you that direction to begin with.
Well, definitely, I just love Halloween, which is definitely a holiday steeped with like classic Gothic overtones. You've got like the spider webs and the candlesticks and everything creepy and shadowy. So that has just always been something that has appealed to me. But I really did want to write something that was an homage to two of my favorite books, which is Rebecca and The Haunting of Hill House. In just the very first line that I read, you can tell it's really basically a ripoff of the first line of Rebecca. And
tribute. The word is tribute, not ripoff.
Oh, right.
Tribute. Yes. Yeah.
A tribute. Yes. So that was very intentionally pursued throughout this book.
Excellent. So Nicholas actually had an interesting comment about the cover of your book, which is that it goes in a different direction than most paperback Gothic books, which have the lady running away from the house.
Whoa, I don't think I ever thought about that, but that is true. The lady who did the illustration, her name is Bailey Rosenland. She came up with this. She had sort of like my publisher and I sort of like came up with a collection of like things that we thought would be good fit for this cover, and then she just kind of rolled with it. And we definitely wanted to get that whole lady with the house situation. But yeah. Wow, I can't believe after almost a year of this book being out, I never really thought about the fact that it is reversed. And
just to give our audience a quick glimpse, we'll put the cover up.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you're right.
Which is pretty cool, because I think a lot of what this book is about is this lady's relationship with the house. It's sort of suggesting that, it's a monster because of her family, but it couldn't be as good at being a monster if it wasn't for her.
Right.
She's a monster enabler. Okay, cool. Yeah. Well, I'm interested in. So this is a novella. So how does your heart work with something this length? Does it work better than a longer or shorter? What do you like to write more?
I had originally wanted this to be a novel, but the more I thought about it, the more fun it felt to try to condense it to this, as Jonathan put it, it's like the perfect cinematic length, right? Like it's at 120 pages, like a script. And it just, I found myself thinking of this story very cinematically, and I think it really moves like a little movie. So I think it was really fun writing this length, because the book I'd finished before that, the novel The Deer Kings, was like 110,000 words, so quite a bit longer. I mean, this is like 28,000. So it was really fun to just have this chance to write something that moves along at like a very good clip, and you can just really focus very intensely on one small situation, but bigger than like a short story. You can like develop the world, you can develop the people. I think I would say I definitely prefer writing novellas to writing short stories. They're a blast. I mean, this is the only one I've written, so maybe I'm wrong, but.
So how does The Secret Skin differ from The Deer Kings thematically, or other than length?
Well, first of all, as you heard, The Secret Skin is an epistolary novel, right? It's told as like a letter. And so it's all told from the point of view of one person in the I voice, and it's set in the 1920s. It's got sort of a historical vibe because the 1920s in Oregon feels very much like, 1896 in New York, right? It's a very, very, very backwater environment. Whereas the Deer Kings is multi-vocal and multi-timeline. It alternates between 1989 with a group of young teenagers, and it alternates between them and their adult selves in 2018. It's also set on the Oregon coast, though. It's still kind of a backwater. And it's like a folk horror story about some kids that create a monster to protect themselves, and their monster gets hijacked by the local community, which tries to use it to get them a new sawmill and make money and win football games and things like that, with unpleasant results. So definitely the two books are very different because they have such different styles, different periods, structures. It's pretty fun.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And I was intrigued looking at some of your other things about An Oath of Dogs, where you eco-terrorism with sentient dogs. It's like, okay, this sounds so cool.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. Yeah, unsurprisingly, that's on a planet which feels like the Pacific Northwest. I guess I just have one texture that I go to all the time. It's
apparently it's working, right? Yeah.
And it's about this planet. At least this portion of the planet is very focused on logging because they create they have these very enormous, very special trees that are great for all kinds of projects. And so it's this very small logging town that also has a kind of neo-Mennonite kind of group that does farming, and they're very trying to think of the right word. They do their own thing. They've got their own little sub community, and they're very removed from the rest of the community. And the main character arrives. She suffers from agoraphobia, and she has a therapy dog to help her, and she's very taken aback because everybody in this town hates dogs, and they're basically not allowed, and she's like, well, I have to have my therapy dog. And it's about how she learns why they hate dogs and how it's connected all of these things together with giant corporations and Mennonites and eco-terrorists, and yeah.
Cool.
Sounds great.
Thank you.
I was just thinking of all the books about sentient or monstrous dogs I've enjoyed over the years. I've got to add that one to the list.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I feel I do get a lot of people ask, they're like, before I can read this book, I have to ask, does the therapy dog make it through the novel okay? And I just want to reassure you, the therapy dog makes it through the book okay.
Very good.
So
that's good to know.
Maybe not all the dogs, though.
Yeah.
Wow.
I have a slightly different question for you, if I could, please. With Nightmare Magazine, one of the things that I think is so cool, I consume all of my words these days by audiobooks. It just works better for my head because I have a hard time making myself sit still to look at paper. I just do. So I'm really intrigued. I've enjoyed so much that you have recordings of some of the stories available to listen to as well as the print version. How do you guys work that all out? How do you decide which ones to do? And
well, it's pretty simple for us. We just so the way the magazine's format is we do 2 full-length short stories and then 2 shorter pieces. It used to be 2 full-length short stories and then 2 reprints. But when I took over, I switched over to running flash fiction and poetry as well. And so the 2 full-length stories are podcast for us by Skyboat Media, who are a great group. They do books and all kinds of stuff. They did an amazing huge, like they did like the audiobooks when we did our special issues of like Women Destroy Horror and Queers Destroy Horror. And they get really talented narrators, and they just do a super terrific job. So we're just really lucky to get to work with them. And they do all the work of like making the podcast happen. I don't know how podcasts work at all. I just like, pick the stories and make sure things are spelled right. And they do all the work, and it's been really great.
That sounds like a great partnership, frankly. Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Cool.
So I think we have one more question to take from the audience, and then we will. Do we have another comment? No. Okay. Bring the other readers back for a little bit more conversation. But Keel James Glenn would like to know how much of your life has been spent in Powell's.
I usually have a very strict budget, so I try not to go to Powell's very often because it is too dangerous. It's just too dangerous. But I actually I love, there's two things about Powell's, but they're kind of sad and kind of great. One is that if you write science fiction, fantasy, or most of the time horror, all of the big events that they host at Powell's are hosted at their store that's in Beaverton and not like the store that everybody knows that's in downtown Portland. So it's sort of like you are like, an unwanted stepchild. But at the same time, the store location out in Beaverton has parking and it's right next door to really, some fun places to eat. So it's not all bad. And then the second thing is that I actually really love Powell's has another location that's in Southeast Portland, and it's like a really quirky location that primarily focuses on secondhand books. And there for a while, they were hosting like all the horror kids, which was awesome. So, but of course, pandemic has sort of messed that up a little bit. But anyway, so there's a lot to know about Powell's, and when you're in Portland, you get like your own favorite locations and things.
That's great. I didn't realize they had multiple locations. The only time I was in Portland, I didn't make it to Powell's, unfortunately. So,
or if you had to check luggage, then maybe it's for the best, because you could break your back carrying things around.
Yes, I was definitely flying. That was an unintended benefit of not making it there. I can't remember the name of the bookstore, but there's a similar enormous bookstore in Toronto.
Oh yeah.
Do you know it?
Heard of that place. It's on my to-go list.
That one, fortunately, I walked in and was so overwhelmed I just couldn't function to pick out books to buy. So that's probably how I would react to Powell's.
Cool.
But why don't we bring Jonathan and Erik back on, and we can talk about what everyone has coming up in the future.
Yay.
All right. And if our audience has any other questions they'd like to ask our reader tonight, please just put those in the chat.
Cool.
All right.
It's been great having you all on. Really interesting, different, and complementary and intriguing kind of pieces. A little bit of different flavors. Very cool.
Thanks. So what do you have coming up next, Erik? Let's start with you. What's in the horizon for you? Any projects you can talk about?
Yeah, you mean like other than the top secret projects that Trump has at his Florida location, undisclosed location, or something?
They're all on the floor.
Overly disclosed location.
I think there's an FBI file on you now, Erik.
Yeah, no. There's a novella collection that is going to be myself, J. Daniel Stone, John Taff, and John Foster. That's going to come out around the end of the year or early 2023.
Cool.
So we don't have a title for it yet, but we've put it together. We have somebody to, publisher, and that will be the next big thing. And then, Carl was talking to me about the poetry stuff. There's an album just came out on Spotify. It's called Let's Save the World Suite. And that's got music by Gene Pritzker, who's a really cool composer. And I'm on 3 of the tracks, doing my poetry thing. So that just came out this week. So that's me
Is the
What-
novella
what's-
project similar to I Can Taste the Blood?
Yeah. So you remember that one with that was in fact almost the same group that had Josh Malaman and Joe Schwartz in it as well. And this is now a slightly different group. But
Okay.
Taff and J. Daniel Stone and I have kept together as a little writing band, a little band of writers.
A writer
That's
pod. Cool.
Yeah. So the novellas will all be slightly connected by theme, and we'll pick a few things that we want to kind of make them interconnect a little better than they do now by the time it comes out. But that's going to be a cool thing. And it's nice to have John Foster on board. So that's the first time I'm working with him.
Yeah, no, that's great. It sounds like an exciting project.
Yeah, we've just had him on to read recently. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
Jonathan, what have you got on the radar?
I feel like I've exhausted myself this year.
Well, you have so many things come out. Yeah.
If people liked the story that I read tonight, I did not finish it. And there's much more subtext in there that is not so tropey and gothic. But yeah, Even in the Grave, go support Jim and Carol. Thanks again. Yeah, so
I'm going to put up the cover because I know that you have a story in the latest official HWA anthology.
So Other Terrors, this has got a great group of people, and it's just a really fresh anthology, and I'm really proud to be a part of it. My story is called It Comes in Waves, very queer, very transgressive, and very me, very personal. Then also Doug Morano's The Hideous Book of Hidden Horrors. I took a trip to Hudson, New York, and a story that I wrote 3 times just came together with that trip, and I rushed it off to him, and it became the closing story of this. And I just got this in the mail, September 27th, the Swan Song of Michael Bailey, the finale of the Chiral Mad series, which Erik is a part of.
I forgot. Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but I forgot we're both in that book too. Yeah.
Let me just dip into some of the people in this: Linda Addison, Jamal Hodge, Erik, Shane Douglas Keene, Sarah Tantlinger, Rath James White, Haley Piper, Josh Mallerman, Victor Laval, John Langan, Jack Ketchum, legend, and some guy named Stephen King. So it's like it's such an insane volume. It's going to take me a bit to get through it, but I'm excited.
That's great. And then, so that's, I guess Michael has said that this is the final volume in the Chiral Mad series. Is that correct? And it's also the biggest, right? Didn't he post something about this being the biggest book in the series?
It's huge. It is 421 pages. Poetry and fiction. There's a little something for everyone in there. And
great.
Yeah, we're psyched.
And Jonathan, your story opens the book.
Yeah, it's called Persistence.
Which is super cool. Yeah.
No pressure, Jonathan.
I threw up when he told me. Yeah.
That's it. People are going to decide to keep to buy and keep reading or not based on the first page of your story.
No, Jesus.
Which is why I'm sure Michael put it there.
Here come the Goodreads reviews. Yep.
Awesome.
What about you, Wendy? What's going on with you these days? I think I've been writing a lot of short fiction for anthologies, and I think some of them are coming out. I think next month there's a Sherlock Holmes anthology called Gaslight Ghouls. It's like horror with Sherlock Holmes, and I've got a story in there that's like Lovecraftian. So I think that's out next month. Another one that's out next month is an anthology from Hungry Shadow Press called It Was All a Dream, Bad Horror Tropes Done Right.
I can't wait to read that one.
Yeah, and the foreword on that is by Laird Barron, which is really exciting. And it's got a bunch of cool people like Gemma Files and Haley Piper in it. I've got one in a lunar punk anthology that comes out, I think, at the beginning of next year. That's like hopeful stuff about climate change, but still with like a gothic or some dark fantasy vibe. All I know is like Starhawk and Neil Gaiman are involved. Whatever.
Yes, please. Yeah.
So that should be fun. And I've got my agent shopping around another horror novel. So please keep your fingers crossed on that one.
Excellent. Did you say Lunar Punk?
Lunar Punk, yes.
Okay. What
Cool.
What is Lunar Punk?
Apparently, like, there's this magazine called Solar Punk magazine, and Solar Punk is this like hope positive climate change science fiction and fantasy genre.
Okay.
But like the idea is that it's set in a future where we get our shit together, apparently. And so they came up with the idea that there could be like lunar punk would be like the goth version of this.
Okay, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think it's kind of it's an unusual concept, like in our genre, the idea that there could be like a future where we don't just suck all the time.
It's funny because I literally was thinking about that today. I came across some reference to a dystopian science fiction novel or something, and it just clicked in me. It's like, where has all the hopeful science fiction gone? There used to be hopeful science fiction. There used to be, positive depictions of what the future could be, and they just don't seem to happen much anymore.
The New York Times just ran an article about Becky Chambers and talking about how she's like the face of hopeful science fiction. I didn't read it because I don't have a subscription and I ran out of articles that month. But apparently it might be a good one. So
fiction itself seems grim, not just the genre. It seems like all fiction is grim.
Even the cookbooks are looking kind of gloomy these days.
Can I ask a question to Wendy? I'm going to put you on the spot, Wendy.
Yeah.
So I put together the market report for the New York chapter of the Horror Writers Association.
Oh, great. Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, for everyone that's still listening and myself, when is Nightmare Magazine opening for submissions?
It's going to open the last week of September. So,
hot damn.
Monday.
Yeah, we have to get to work. We have to get to work right away, right?
And we're not doing flash this time, but still the theme, like under 1,000 words for creative nonfiction, short stories under 7,500 words, and then poetry as well.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you.
Cool.
Yeah.
Tremendous. That's
all right. I'm so excited about all of these projects that you have coming out. They just sound like great books. I'm looking forward to them.
Everybody's got the cool shit. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exciting. What do you have coming up, Jim?
I don't know. I have to mow the lawn tomorrow, so
me too.
I've got that coming up, but no, I don't really have anything new to report. I'm still waiting on, which should be out soon, the Kolchak, the Night Stalker 50th anniversary graphic novel anthology, where I got to write the last Kolchak story, it was called The Last Byline. And I think I've now, since our last Galactic Terrors session, seen the colored, lettered, finished story, and am just blown away with the art from everybody. The main artist, the colorist, and the letterer all just brought so much skill to it. It's just really kind of awesome in like the literal sense of the word awesome.
That's so cool.
So cool. Carol, how about you? I know you have a new anthology out.
Yes, that kind of took a little bit of my time, but I have to say we pulled this anthology together in 2 months. And so many people were like really into the concept of supporting reproductive health, and we have some fabulous authors in there. We had some other lists of stuff. We've got a great introduction by Gwendolyn Keist. We've got Linda Addison, C.M. Harris, Nicole Givens-Kurtz, Tara Laskowski, Lee Murray, Bridget Nelson, Jeff Strand, Teal James Glenn, Stephen Van Patten, Mark Abbott, and a bunch of other folks, Christine Shiner. We've got a bunch of folks in this with a whole bunch of other folks that I am new to learning about. So they're coming along. So that's what kept me busy. And now I'm going to sit back tomorrow for at least half a day and go, then I'll cut the lawn with an audiobook.
That's it.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead, Carol.
No, I was going to say. So we had mentioned at the beginning of the show, for those who weren't tuned in or didn't get to hear, we have a newsletter that people can subscribe, and get a little bit of news about what's coming up, and we have a little bit of a giveaway, some ebooks or PDFs of the books we're willing to send out to 3 of the folks that are signed up on the newsletter by the end of the show tonight. So sign up, we'll do a random drawing, and happy to send some words your way, everybody.
Yes, thank you. And please remember to click subscribe below to follow future Galactic Terrors transmissions. And if you're afraid of the commitment that clicking represents, just remember that we are on every second Thursday of the month. And next month, October 14th, we will be featuring Michael Arnzen, Michelle Brittany, and Stephen Van Patten.
Next month, actually, it's actually on the 13th next month. Thursday the 13th. Yeah.
It will be on October 13th.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, please. That was an important thing. I have fixed the date. I am occasionally calendar challenged, so I appreciate Carol keeping me on track there.
The 14th is my wedding anniversary. That's why I remember this. Yeah.
Very good. But it should be a great show, and it will be featuring a new thing on Galactic Terrors. Michelle Brittany will actually be bringing some nonfiction reading to the program, so that will be interesting to see how that goes. And if you're interested in finding out more about the HWA New York chapter, you can visit our website, hwany.org. So thank you all.
Thank you, everybody. So much fun words and great chats. I've enjoyed talking and listening to all of you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your stories with us, for answering our questions, and for just hanging out and having a great time with us, or making a great time with us. I hope you had a great time.
Thanks all. This is a good gang.
Yeah, this gang should hang out outside of the two-dimensional
That's
screen.
it.
Yeah, Wendy, get on a plane.
Right?
Get on a plane. Yeah.
And you guys will meet at KGB again, okay?
Yes. Do that. We've got to get to one of the upcoming readings, which they're now on
The second Wednesday.
second Wednesdays. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you all. Everyone, take care, and we hope to see you again next month. All right.
Well, thanks for tuning in.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks.